Right, good evening. I'm Jenny and I'm a therapist in Great Dunmow in Essex, and I've been working transpersonally for 20 years, and I've also got a small gardening initiative called Get Digging It. So today, that's just to give you a little bit about me, but today I'm introducing Graeme to you, because Graeme's my fifth video, fifth interview in my series of I Can't Stay Quiet Any Longer. It's just suddenly grabbed me in the last week. I just have to start talking. I can't sit on my proverbial any longer. So Graeme is somebody I met on Facebook on a mutual friend's wall, and I could see that he was on the same page as me, and I could see that he was up against a wall of intransigence on this mutual friend's wall. So I kind of contacted him and said, "Woo! I know where you are. I know how you're feeling. Let's have some discussions." That was a couple of years ago, maybe 3. I don't remember, Graeme. So, Graeme, I'm going to pass over to you. If you could describe to us your background, where you are right now, and the stepping stones you've got to be where you are, would be fascinating, because so many people might be somewhere on that journey and be struggling with the next step and not know where to go. So if you could sort of plot for us where you've come from and where you find yourself now.
Okay. Hello, good evening. My name's Graeme Norbury. I'm 53 years old, from the north of England. I'm currently in Ambleside in Cumbria. I grew up in Lancaster, went to school there, was fortunate enough to have a good education. And I ended up working in the City of London, which in the late 80s, in the boom years. And I remained in sort of stock market type stuff for almost 30 years, living in London, Scandinavia, and for many years in Spain. And I found the job very straightforward. Everyone said it's terribly stressful, and I just liked it because there were lots of moving parts, and it was an immensely complex system. And I found it sort of challenging, interesting. Every day was different, and the money was good, and it was all super fantastic. Then after about, I would say 15 years, I began to become a little frustrated that I felt I should, with 15 years experience in the stock market, I should have been able to predict with a little bit more accuracy events or trajectories of share prices and things like that. And I began to suspect that it wasn't quite as straightforward as I believed, and that there was in fact sort of manipulation, corruption taking place behind the scenes. And so I began to look into that, probably around late 90s, when the sort of tech stocks were absolutely booming. And I began to question my own education in terms of what we'd been told in terms of how the financial system works. You don't get told very much at school. Even if you study economics or something, you don't get told really how the financial system works. So I began to look into that, which was 20 years ago online. It was a little bit of a slow process, maybe 1 or 2 books. And I discovered gold and precious metals, and how the modern system of finance about 100 years ago was separated from gold. And you have these people who now have the control, central bankers have the control of money, so they can increase flows of money whenever they want to whomever they want, and therefore they can run the whole show. And so that revealed to me that there was a tremendous hidden power that was capable of controlling many things in the world. And so that kind of helped me to understand how the stock markets moved and how markets worked in general. But it also led me to other areas that I realized that I'd been in the dark about that. So I'd been in the dark about the fundamentals of money, despite having worked for 15 years in financial markets. And the vast majority of my colleagues were all in the same boat. And it also led me to other areas where we'd been kept in the dark. And so one of those was perhaps medicine. I'd always been interested in biology, medicine, that kind of thing. And I began to realize that we didn't necessarily know as much as we thought we knew, and that perhaps something had happened in the early 20th century where significant financial powers had taken over the medical system, the medical schools and the medical system, and they'd moved it away from natural healing to healing or attempted healing and treatment of symptoms using pharmaceuticals, which were primarily derived from petrochemicals. There's a whole money kind of horrible backstory to how we get to the state we are in medicine today. So I was kind of still interested in all that stuff. Then I would say probably 9/11 was a significant thing, although I didn't see through it at the time. I thought it was very, very strange, very, very unusual the way that the events took place, and I believed what was happening. We were trading stock markets when it occurred, and so it was a real event for us to react to. And so we followed the news minute by minute, and we believed it. And it was only a couple of years later, when the dust had settled in my own mind, that I began to go back to it and go, it's not right. It's just events. And so I spent quite a lot of time delving into that, and then realised that the official story, which is laughable.
Laughable.
I mean,
Did you say it's laughable?
Yeah, it's absolutely laughable. The official story. But once you've proven to yourself that the official story is clearly false, and you then go, but hang on, it's being pushed by every world leader. Are they all in on this sort of inside sort of thing that it's an enormous scam to pull off, and why? And then I really went down some rabbit holes, and I was fortunate in that when I discovered the whole gold and the financial services and the financial system, the connections there, I came across many different commentators that I realized I could trust, because I understood the financial system and I could see what they were saying in relation to gold, and I could see how it intermeshed. I could check the validity of the individual commentators. I was confident that I had a group of contacts that were honest and reliable, as much as I could prove that myself. And so I then began to use links that they might recommend to other people to further my research into different areas. So I was moving from a base which I felt was relatively solid, rather than just diving into the internet and going into the depths of search and randomly picking a madman who's written a blog. I was kind of going gradually, if you like, to discover what was going on. And I went through all sorts of I've probably been through every single conspiracy that you can care to mention.
I know how that feels.
Which was quite hard work, but I'm not an easily shocked person. So I mean, I don't like disturbing images of children and things like that. Obviously nobody does, but I can cope with it, and I can understand it's necessary to learn about what has happened in terms of the paedophile networks running I'm not sure how many of your viewers are up to speed on this, but once you realise that paedophilia is used as the ultimate blackmail tool, you realise that it is what connects absolutely every corrupt structure in the whole country, in the whole world. And that's a big thing to swallow. But once you see that, everything else falls into place. You can just see how people can be absolutely controlled by the threat of revealing the knowledge that they are a paedophile. And so you then take it a step further and you realize that, in fact, what's going to happen is that people are going to select paedophiles to be in positions of power. You don't get in a position of power and then accidentally become a paedophile. What happens is people are selected who have paedophile tendencies. They then record them, take pictures of them for future blackmail, future control. Yeah, it used to be homosexuality that was used as a tool, but that began to lose its power as homosexuality normalized.
This is one of the most difficult parts of the jigsaw to really get your head around, because you have to suspend all of your other knowledge, your former knowledge about how the world works.
Yeah, that's one of the things that's absolutely true. You have to be willing to say, okay, if I want to learn something new, if I want to really understand, if something doesn't make sense, maybe one of the reasons it doesn't make sense is that you're assuming too many things based on your past knowledge. You've got to
Absolutely.
just suspend it, and then say, could it be like this? And so then I began to realize that it wasn't just a little bit of financial corruption, and it wasn't just a little bit of manipulating the markets to stop them collapsing or to avoid bankruptcies of certain companies or to favour companies over another. It wasn't that. It was far more sinister. And the control network was far more sinister. It wasn't just financially based, but there's a financial aspect to it, obviously. There's a power aspect to it, but there's also this extremely horrible paedophilia. You can't get away from it. Wherever you scratch the surface in any of these different areas, it comes back down to child trafficking, knowledge of child trafficking, and I'm sorry, it's just there. It's hopefully being revealed. And I've been aware of it for 10 or 15 years, and it's now a little bit more widely known. But the average person in the street still would be hard pressed to accept that. If you ask most people in the street, they can't explain why politicians make such shit decisions.
Yeah.
They cannot explain it. They just think that they're incompetent or they're taking a backhand.
So therefore, we have to assume, therefore, that the government isn't actually the government. The government is just an instrument of something bigger or more ominous behind it.
Yeah, and this is, the more you dig, you realise that you're told that you have a government and you can vote for certain parties, and so you get the idea that you have some influence on what happens. And then you realise that they're just puppets, and in the shadows there's someone else controlling. And the means of controlling the politicians is, I'm not saying that every single politician is a paedophile, but you can be a paedophile and you can be covering up for a paedophile. And that in itself, if you've been covering up for paedophilia for many years, even though you're not involved at all, that in itself is something that you're not going to be proud of and you don't want anyone to reveal. So you're also blackmailable. Once you're sucked into that circle of activities, you're bound to be controllable. So I think that's how it runs, which is awful. And it needs to
So you're saying that the whole world is based on that, or I mean, you can go even deeper than that, can't you? If you really want to, there's layers beyond the paedophilia.
Yeah, I mean, you then go back to, you can start to talk about Satanism. I have no particular knowledge that apart from what I've gathered from researching over the years, there just seemed to be a satanic element to the people who are genuinely in charge. I think there's an element of psychopathic behavior. I think that historically, when we lived in very, very small communities, psychopaths who occur naturally, they're about sort of between 1% and 5% of the population. And some of them are very, very stupid and they just die early because they do stupid things and they get killed or they get put in jail. And then there are some very, very intelligent psychopaths. And historically or ancestrally, if someone displayed psychopathic sort of behavior, they would be expelled from the tribe, or they would just be killed, because the rest of the tribe recognizes that they possibly exist knowing that someone was psychopathic. And so they didn't have a place in society. But as we got bigger and we moved to bigger cities and everything became more anonymous, it was much easier for them to hide, or at least go unnoticed. And the psychopathic traits mean that they are willing to step on anybody to achieve their goal. So in a society like we've had for the last few hundred years, those people will naturally rise to the surface. And so I think it's fairly safe to say that the vast majority of leaders of any organization that has any significant power on earth today have psychopathic, or at the very least sociopathic tendencies.
Mm.
And that also helps to explain why we have wars and horrible poisonous chemicals in our food supplies. And then you have the idea of wealth, the historic idea of why do people do this? Is it just for the money? Why do they want to have so much wealth? And I think it's all about, it's not the wealth that they have today, it's how much wealth and power they have that they can pass on to their descendants. And so all these super wealthy families are interested in guaranteeing that their wealth will continue into the future as much as possible. They take very, very long-term views.
The wealth is more than money, isn't it? The wealth is really a sense of ownership, you know, that they have dominion. The wealth is not just about money, it's about the control and the manipulation of people, which is wealth for them.
Yeah, and there's also, you can take it further. You don't have to go down the extraterrestrial UFO route, but which is it's a rabbit hole I've been down, but I'm not convinced there's any particular value in discussing whether there are extraterrestrial. But I do believe there's an energetic aspect, and I think that we are unwittingly giving up energy to people or things, or whatever you want to call it, some higher power that has an ability to harvest our energy, our emotional energy, whether it's positive or negative. And so I think we're subject to a lot of manipulation globally using the media and the internet nowadays.
Tell me what
to try to provoke us, to get us into either a state of fear or occasionally a state of joy. But the idea seems to be that I think there's an ancient ability to somehow access the energy that we create, and we're not aware of it. It's a subconscious thing.
Yeah, totally. I've just recorded a 10-minute video earlier today on that. It's about how the mind and the body. It's almost like the mind has been separated from the body, and they're harvesting the energy of fear. That's what they love, because once we're in fear, the body's under threat. If we can have wall-to-wall propaganda and constant fear, then the body is so threatened by that your immunity goes down. You know, they've done their job. They've got your minds. They've got your mind. Yeah.
Well, the moment you get terrorized and you begin to live in fear, your brain goes back to the most basic, or the limbic system of literally fight or flight. It's the oldest part of our sort of reptilian brain, if you like. And so we're unable to use discernment. We're not. We just want someone to help us, to save us, and it's almost like a panic. So we're not able to see through lies. We're not able to compare two different situations and consider them. We look for a higher authority to help us, and we look to escape from the fear, and so we get back to sort of very, very basic thinking. And I think that's one of the mechanisms, certainly, that's used to control masses of people. And you also, I've been down lots of rabbit holes about the whole mind control thing, which has been introduced. I'm sure it's been practiced for decades, if not centuries, but it seems to have been perfected using technologies in the last 100 or so years, probably more so in the last 50 years. And there's some horrific stories about that, you know, people being experimented on against their will, whether they were prisoners or whether they were sort of considered as disposable human beings. But it has been, there have been public records of these mind control experiments having taken place. And we know that electronic frequencies can be used to stimulate certain thinking. They've got the ability to make you hear voices, possibly even see images that are not real. And so that all these things exist, and if they exist, you can pretty much guarantee that some evil psychopath will use them to his advantage.
One of the most amazing films actually on YouTube that you can find is by a couple actually called Truth Stream Media. I don't know if you know them, but
I've heard of it. I've watched some other stuff.
Yeah, they're amazing. They've got a film that they've pulled together called The Minds of Men. And they also interview Peter Breggin, who is a classic, psychiatrist who has rejected totally psychiatry, though he is a qualified psychiatrist, because of the misuse and the abuse of drugs and the way that minds are controlled by psychiatry. So tell me, Graeme, so where you are today is a very different place to where you were when you were in the commercial industry, in the banking and stock market industry. Mm. There was a turning point. When you obviously left that business and you then started to move over into health and well-being. So fill in the gap. How did that happen?
It was approximately around the time when my daughter was born. She's now 16. So we're talking about 2004, something like that. And I was already beginning to realise, because I'd already brought myself up to speed about the whole 9/11 thing and how the world is not as we see it, and so I was incredibly sceptical about everything. And I wanted to really understand health, my own selfish purposes, and for the good of my daughter, really. So I thought, well, I should really look into what the real truth is about health and nutrition, rather than just what we've been told. Because based on what I'd learned about everything else, just about everything else we've been told was wrong. So my guess was that what we're told about nutrition is probably also wrong. So I started to delve into that area. It's around the time, I was kind of approaching middle age. Maybe elderly relatives were dying of different diseases, and I just thought I should probably bring myself up to speed on this health. I just made it a priority, and I dived into that. And that's a nightmare field to understand. So I dug around for ages, and initially I got a little bit trapped, like most people do, into believing that it's all about food. And I didn't do anything sort of stupid like I'm a vegan or anything like that, but I looked into different ways to consider nutrition, and I did things like sort of straightforward stuff that you immediately feel a benefit from. I didn't get sucked into the exercise thing because I realized that there wasn't that important. Then I discovered a doctor in America called Dr. Jack Kruse, who just blew me away, because everyone else was talking about food, and he was jumping up and down saying, it's not about food, it's about light, water, and magnetism. I'm like, oh. So I joined his site, read all his stuff, and it was really deep, heavy science. And it's not, I did science at school, I was a bit of a physics guy, but I'd never done anything quantum. We never got taught anything about quantum physics. And then I realized that physics used to use Newtonian physics, and then when quantum physics came in, they recognized that it was superior in every way to the previous system they'd been using. So they immediately adopted quantum principles in physics. And they went on to huge leaps and bounds in terms of inventions in the 20th century. And then chemistry followed shortly behind, and so chemistry now uses quantum principles. Biology is the only one of the three major sciences that has refused to switch from inferior Newtonian physics to the quantum physics, quantum mathematics, quantum electrodynamics, whatever you want to call it. And I began to look into that, and I realized that the reason is because the whole of biology supports the whole of medicine and the whole of the pharmaceutical industry. is the single biggest industry on earth. And so every single product that they've ever released is based ultimately on biology, on classical biology, based on Newtonian physics. And if you were to apply quantum theory, biologists would have to change some of their equations, some of their rules, and some of their principles. And that would undermine the vast majority of modern medicine. And so they simply can't afford to. They're not allowed to. And so if you're a biologist in a leading university and you want to study quantum biology, you can't. You can't get the funding, because the funding ultimately comes from pharmaceutical companies. And so you've got all these biologists just banging their head against the wall because they can see people, and what's begun to happen in the last 10 years or so is that physicists who normally study inanimate objects have begun to apply their recent experience with quantum maths and quantum electrodynamics, and they've gone, hey, we can look at living systems that are a collection of molecules which are in constant motion and actually have a life force, and they obey the laws of quantum mechanics. And so you've now got people from physics moving into biology, and they would be called they would be called biophysicists. And then you've got people who are biologists who go out on their own. They don't get supported by biology, but they kind of branch out on their own and they do something called quantum biology. So quantum biology and biophysics are effectively the same things, but all they're doing is they're just updating biology, bringing it up to date in the same way as chemistry and physics has been brought the last 100 years.
So that must be quite a threat to the standing model already. The pharmaceuticals can't be very happy about that.
No, they're not happy, and they don't talk about it. You will very, very rarely find any mention of biophysics or quantum biology in a standard pharmaceutical company's comments or in medical data.
So how is it we're missing it? You know, what is it purely because the pharmaceuticals have hold of the market and they have hold of the medical system that we can't see this, or is it because there's not enough people working on it, or what do you think?
Well, it's all those things. I mean, the entire medical system was taken over by effectively the Rockefellers in the 1930s, where they very, very cunningly, under the guise of wanting to improve America's health, and they invested lots in these medical schools, but they only gave them funding if they followed a certain syllabus, if you like, or a certain. And so they've had the medical school, and that they outlawed all the previous healing modalities. They were just discarded, and you couldn't study them at these schools. And so that was what was promoted. And you've got the American Medical Association and all that sort of thing. So for the last roughly 100 years, we've been on a pharmaceutical model where we are selling pharmaceutical drugs to treat symptoms. And the symptoms may well disappear, but the pharmaceutical drug that you've administered creates what we call side effects. But reality, what you've done, you've got a symptom, you've suppressed it by throwing a chemical at it. So the symptom's been suppressed deeper into the body, then it re-emerges as another disease a few months or years down the line, which requires more pharmaceutical treatment, more money. And it ultimately ends in a disease such as cancer, a disorder such as cancer, which now ends up bankrupting the vast majority of Americans in their later years in life, because they cannot afford the treatments, and the pharmaceutical companies ultimately take all the money off people.
And so soon to be this country. And soon to be this country.
Yeah, well, here we don't bankrupt the people, we just bankrupt the nation. So we're paying the same prices approximately for the treatments, maybe a little bit cheaper, but you don't get individual bankruptcies, but you still spend vast amounts of money trying to save people who've got cancer, but you end up killing them anyway in a very expensive way, and the NHS goes bankrupt. So rather than have the individuals go bankrupt, which is what happens in America, here the NHS goes bankrupt and affects the nation.
So how long have you been following Jack Kruse? Because I did get his book. I read the RX Paleo, And
Hmm.
like you said, it's very intense, it's very heavy. I mean, you need a degree in quantum physics just to wade through it. I kind of extracted something out of it, but it was incredibly hard to read. So it wasn't
It
very
is.
digestible.
It is
So,
hard to read. I mean, he's quite brilliant, really. He's he gives most of his stuff away for free, certainly for the first. I've been following him since about 2012, so 8 years, and I've read pretty much every single thing he's written, and I've seen every single interview. I've never actually met him, but he's a brilliant guy. Most of the stuff he gives away for free, and he's spent many, many years helping people for free. He worked he's a neurosurgeon and has been for many years, but he's now more interested, and for the last 10 years, he's been trying to explain his thinking to as many people who are willing to listen, in the hope that they will go out into the world and try to spread the word. Because he's recognized that he can't change the medical system from the inside. It has to be changed from the outside. It has to be changed from the patient level or from individual new doctors. So a lot of the people that he has on board now are doctors in training who've recognized that what they're being told is not necessarily correct, and they've understood what principles of what he's teaching, and so they're doing the standard training, which they know is to some degree false, but they're doing it because they want to get their qualification at the end of it, because the only way to in a practice. But they are taking on board his principles and trying to work them into the way that they would treat patients. And so over the next few years, you're going to see more and more practitioners, not huge numbers, but probably enough to make a difference, because these people will be far more effective in their treatment of patients. They may never work within the actual formal healthcare structure, but I believe this is where we link back to your original question. What happened? I was working in financial markets, and now suddenly I'm doing something different. I decided, for a combination of reasons, that I wanted to leave my job. I'd had a good run. It was great. I was incredibly bored, and I believed the stock markets were just totally fake, vicious, and manipulated by the central banks. So there was no skill involved in analyzing a company. You could say this company A is better than company B, so you should buy company A and sell company B. And then the central bank would just release a massive wave of liquidity into the market, and so both companies would go up the same amount. So it's kind of, the whole thing was just a bit pointless. All you were really speculating on was, when is the next wave of central bank liquidity going to be released into the market? And if you knew that, you'd be able to make a fortune. And if you don't know that, you're just wasting your time. So it just became incredibly boring. It was like sitting in a casino and watching people play at the table, just incredibly dull. So I decided that I wanted to get out of that, and I realized that I was very interested in health. And I could see that Jack Kruse may not have everything right, but he's got enough right. And I could see that the system, the medical system that we've got, has got enough wrong. I mean, it's okay if you get run over. If you get run over by a bus, the medical system is great at scraping you off the road, taking you to hospital and patching you up and repairing you. If you have a heart attack, they bring you back. All the sort of extreme trauma is tremendously well done by the health service. That's about it. Everything else is a shambles, and it's a shambles because they don't understand the fundamentals of chronic disease. They don't understand mitochondria, they don't understand energy flows, they don't understand light, they don't understand magnetism, they don't understand water. Because they're not taught it in medical school. So the three, once you get with what Jack's saying, you realize that light, water, and magnetism are genuinely the three sort of keys to human health.
and it's actually,
and then you realize that doctors don't learn any of those three. And then you can understand why chronic diseases are not being dealt with by the healthcare system.
I mean, this light magnetism and what's the other one? Light magnetism and water.
Water.
This is ancient knowledge. This goes back millennia. It's ancient knowledge. It goes right back into our American Indian people, to ancient...
The Chinese medicine, Indian Ayurvedic medicine.
Yeah.
They talk about chi, they talk about prana, they talk about meridians, flow, light.
Yeah.
So they understood it. They were not able to quantify it, to measure it, or to explain it in what we would consider a scientific way. And this is a very interesting point you brought up there, because I used to be, when I was a sort of black and white, everything had to be incredibly logical when I was younger. And I was very poor at sort of nuanced thinking. I used to dismiss things like homeopathy as stuff and nonsense, which many people still do today. There's still a lot of pressure in the health service to finally cut the last vestiges of funding for homeopathy, even though it costs next to nothing and is to some degree effective. They still want to get rid of it because they consider it as woo-woo. And I used to share the view. I used to think it's all nonsense. You have this minuscule thing that you can't even detect in the water. How can it possibly have any effect in the human body? But when you learn about how we truly work, and we work on resonant energies and tiny, tiny changes in magnetism, in the structure of water, and that sends a different signal to a different cell, and there's messages are transmitted throughout your body using resonant energy transfer. Once you begin to understand that, you can see how homeopathy would work. So I've been able to, in the last 5 or 6 years, I'm far more able to sit down and explain how something like Reiki might work, how homeopathy might work, how acupuncture might work. And I find myself more willing to defend those practices and support them, because I can explain it. There's a way. Once you see the idea of health from an energetic point of view and from a flow point of view, you can see how they work and you can explain it. So if you can explain it scientifically, it's no longer woo. So I've completely changed my opinion on those things. I was never against them. I just ignored them. But now I'm quite supportive of those modalities, and they some of them have a role.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at ancient societies where there's a shaman at the top who's a medicine man or woman, these people have knowledge, but it's not intellectual knowledge, it's not academic, it's not rational knowledge, it's body knowledge. They just feel it, they know it, they're connected, they understand at a different level to the way we understand.
Yeah, it's almost subconscious.
Yeah, it's kind of body knowledge, it's instinct, it's what animals live by, and it's how animals know how to behave. They just follow an instinct. And I think what we've done with well, not you and I, but the way that we've been managed, because that's how it's been, like dogs in a cage. The way we've been managed over the last couple of 100 years, maybe 500 years, is to strip us out of our bodies and put us into our intellect, as though that only the highly clever people who can manipulate data and rationally explain things are the ones that hold the secrets. They're not the ones that hold the secrets. We all have the secret within us, but we've kind of been coached and educated to go and consult the expert, as though the expert knows us.
What should I eat? What shall I eat? I mean, animals in the wild, they don't have to consult with someone, figure out what they should be eating. But we do. We have to consult the nutritionist. Tell us what to eat.
Yeah. And the thing about Jack Kruse, when I've listened to him, when he's because he's quite up on food and eating as well, isn't he? He's quite aware of what you should and shouldn't be eating. But when I listened to him, he said, what you need to do is eat what grows around you. Don't import anything. Don't bring stuff in from another country. Don't eat out of season. He says, eat what grows around you, because that has got the same vibrational frequency as the air and the earth that you walk on and the water that you drink. It's all coming from that locality.
Yeah, well, that's exactly he says it's not the food. People say, oh, I should be eating this, and then they start to look at the food. They put food first and they focus on the food. His view is that our bodies are controlled by mitochondria, which are sort of these energy producing, we know them as the energy powerhouse, a fairly common generic, but they're much more than that. They're like the energy management system. If you like, they're the hardware is your nuclear genetic material, which comes from your mother and your father. That produces your physical structure. And then the mitochondria, they do produce the energy, but they also sense your environment and they fine tune your energetic output to match your environment. So they are desperate for more information. You've got trillions of these things. Each cell has between 10 and 1,000 mitochondria, depending on where they are in the body. The brain and the heart have more, and the have a bit less. And so you've got all these nano microscopic magnets, electromagnets, effectively, which are their sensors, which are exquisitely sensitive to your environment. And so what you're trying to do is, if you give them as much information as possible, they will be better able to make the finest possible adjustment for your energy management. So you will be healthy and happy and jolly and have lots of energy. And so if you're, and the single biggest input is light, which is Jack's big thing. And we were designed to be stark naked, walking around barefoot on the earth. So during the day, you have the sun shining on you, and at night you'd retreat to your cave and you'd be in darkness. And so in the modern day, we've got away from that. That's the fundamental big mistake that we have made, is that we now have electric light at night. And so that basic signal, which is sort of the on switch in the morning and the off switch at night, has become blurred, especially in modern society, and only really in the last 100, 150 years. So that's the first big mistake. And then where food comes into it, food is very, very secondary to light. Food is just another signal. And so the food should be what you find in your environment, because prior to international trade, you would only eat what you could find literally within walking distance. And so it would have grown in your environment. It would have been subject to the same sunlight that you're subject to. And so when you ate the food, your body's able to take the food, sense the electrons, the power that they've got, the photons that those electrons are carrying. And when that food was metabolized and broken down into protons and electrons in your mitochondria would get a sense of these subtle energies in terms of how much power the photon had, how strong the light was that created the food in the first place, the spin on the electrons. There's all these different subtle things which we're only now being able to, in the last 30 or 40 years, being able to measure these things in laboratories. But your mitochondria are able to sense them. And so the food coming from your locality and you living in harmony with the earth, naked, barefoot, outdoors, meant that your mitochondria is receiving messages from your physical feelings, location, and everything. And then internally, your mitochondria are receiving a very similar, coherent message from the food which grows around you. So if you do that, your body is very, very able to figure out exactly where you are on the planet, exactly what time of year it is, and exactly what time of day it is. And it can therefore make the precise adjustments for what's the best setting for every cell in your body at that particular moment. So you'll be unbelievably healthy.
That word coherence means a lot to me, where it's like the body knows who it is and what it needs. It's kind of inherent. It's coherent with itself. It's not being fed stuff that comes from halfway around the planet. or if they're still there, or
Correct.
it's not being, yeah, and they're not being fed on this beige food, you know, like donuts and biscuits and stuff. It's this is all stuff that we just don't need. And the other thing what you mentioned about this idea of, like, you know, you rise with the sun and you go to sleep with it. I don't know if you've come across a series of books by Maigret, Vladimir Maigret, on Anastasia. But there was a couple that read, they're very well worth reading. There's nine volumes. I've read up to 4 now. But the first volume talks about, you know, the relationship we have with the planet and with each other. But a couple that actually read this book has changed the lives of thousands of people around the world. The one couple that read this book in New York at the time, they were Russians. These people are Russian. And they read the book and they decided to give up their lives in New York City and go back to Russia and live off the land. And this is how Putin has managed to get all of these organic farms up and running. You know, in people want to be in Russia. They want to work on the land. They want to help supply their own people with organic food. But he says what they did was they started to learn to live with the light. And they would get up with the light in the summer and go to sleep with the light. And of course, Russia's further north than we are. So there's even less nighttime to sleep. But because they were following the cycles of light, they were fully energized all the time. They were fully engaged with everything. They weren't tired because they'd only had 4 hours sleep. And in the winter, they were having 16 hours sleep all through the dark hours. And they weren't, you know, what is there to do in the winter? You know, if you're living off the land.
Winter is, I mean, if you live at the equator, you've got 12 hours daylight, 12 hours nighttime all year round. And so you've got very little light stress. You've got a perfectly regular cycle every single day. Whereas where we are, which is relatively far north, we're sort of 53 degrees north, you've got quite considerable light stress. I mean, here, in the winter, we get probably 6 hours of daylight because we've got mountains on either side as well. And in the summer, it comes up about 4 o'clock and goes down about 11 in the evening. So there's a massive difference. Not quite like the North Pole, but it's getting there. And so that is an additional stressor for your mitochondria, because if you live at the equator, your body just has to adjust to a simple 12-hour clock. It's relatively easy. If you're up here, your body has to gradually change, and we're approaching the equinox where your body's also sensing that, oh, suddenly the days are, now we've got the 12-hour, we're just about to get to the 12-hour stability of that we would have if we lived on the equator, and then it goes beyond that and you get the long days. So these things are all stressors. But a stressor it's a provider of information. So if you're able to take on the extra information, see it as a stress or a negative, or you could see it as simply, that's just extra information. And the more information I have, as long as I'm able to process it, I can come up with a plan to respond. And so what we do is we mess things up by wearing clothes, by using electricity at night to light houses and have screens shining in our faces. And then we work shifts and we work night shifts and all this kind of thing, which has only really happened in the last 120 years. And Kruse will tell you that the fundamental driver of what we call modern disease, which is all the chronic diseases, and now the biggest killers, they're all driven fundamentally by artificial light at night. That's the single biggest cause thus far of chronic disease and ill health in society.
I mean, that is revolutionary, that statement alone, because none of us could live without light at night. And you know,
well, of course, we could.
not in this modern society that we live in. It would be incredibly hard to live without light at night. And also, having spoken to Mark Steele just earlier this week, he said the LED light, the blue light, the bright blue-white light that comes out of the street furniture, the street lamps, is the most toxic frequency of light to human health. I don't know what your view is on that.
Well, if as long as you're considering what the toxic frequency within the visible spectrum, then he's quite correct. Because we only see visible light. We can be exposed to ultraviolet and infrared, and we may have detectors for it in our skin and in our eyes, but we're not aware of it. If someone shines an infrared light on you, if you can feel the heat, you can sense it, but you don't see it. But he's right. Within the visible spectrum, the most damaging frequency is the blue light frequency that LEDs have been manufactured at, which is about 450, 480 nanometers in terms of wavelength. And that coincides with, we have a receptor in our eyes. This is something that not many doctors know. When you and I went to school, we learned that there were two photoreceptors in the eye, the rod and the cone. But it was discovered about 15 years ago that there's a third receptor called melanopsin, which we don't use for visible, we don't use for seeing, but it's purely there to detect the presence of blue light and the absence of blue light. It's an on-off switch. And it's precisely triggered with blue light around the 460, 480 nanometers. And the idea of it is when the sun rises, there is some blue in the sun, about 10%. And so that little bit of blue in the sun is enough to trigger this receptor in your eye. And that tells you, wake up, it's daytime, get on with doing shit. You get switched onto the day program. And then when the sun goes down, the blue disappears and the receptor trips back the other way, and you switch to nighttime program, rest, recuperate, rebuild, repair, sleep, and that triggers the release of melatonin. So you have this two distinct cycles in your body: the daytime cycle, where you go and do shit and get injured and get stressed and get chased by animals and do stuff, and then the nighttime program, where you don't do anything really and you go to sleep and you repair yourself. And so if you respect those cycles, you will live a healthy life. If you don't respect them, you could be asking for trouble, because you could get into a situation where the repair wasn't done properly, and so you'd begin to accumulate cells which hadn't been correctly repaired, and so you wake up the next morning, you're running on kind of slightly secondhand cells that are not really optimum. But the issue with the blue light is in sunlight. Like I said, it's 10%, maybe 15%, depending on the time of year, the time of day. But it's a minority component of sunlight. But 40%, roughly speaking, of sunlight is red and infrared. And red and infrared light for humans is very healing, very soothing, and it gives us a slow, steady energy. It's actually, it can red and infrared light, if you shine it on your cell, on your body, can generate ATP within your cell.
What's that?
It's the adenosine triphosphate, which is known as the sort of energy intermediate. So when you eat food and it's metabolized in your cells, it's broken down into electrons and protons. So the food comes in, and out the other side, and you match it with oxygen, which you breathe. Out the other side comes energy in the form of ATP, carbon dioxide, and water. So that's the sort of energy equation, and that's actually the reverse. Our mitochondria, they reverse the process of photosynthesis. Photosynthesis takes energy from the sun, carbon dioxide from the air, and water from the plant's roots to form a carbohydrate. So there's energy input from the sun, and you capture the energy from the sun in the form of a carbohydrate. When that carbohydrate goes into our cells, it's broken down and its energy is released in the form of light, and it's captured by our mitochondria. and it produces what we call ATP, which is then used as a substrate. According to biochemistry, it's not strictly speaking accurate, but ATP is considered by most people as a measure of energy production in cells. But if you shine red and infrared light on cells, they will produce ATP with no food input at all. So if you lay in the sun, you can generate energy. In a way, you are a solar panel.
Wow.
And so going back to the blue light issue, blue light is in the sun, but it is always accompanied by a significant component of red and infrared. So blue light is damaging, inflammatory, and stimulatory, but it is never, ever alone in nature. It's always, when the sun comes up, there's always red and infrared and a little bit of blue. It's never on its own. The problem with these LED lights is that they are on their own. You have LED lights, you have an LED screen. There's no red and infrared. Well, there's a little bit of red, but there's no infrared coming from your screen. And
so what about the idea of
balance?
What about yellow light?
You only get the damage.
I've heard there's more yellow light in the morning and more blue light in the afternoon. So tell me about yellow light, because you said there's 10% blue, 40 or so % red or infrared. But there's also yellow light, isn't there? Tell me a bit about that. So these are the three primary colours, aren't they? Blue, red and yellow.
Yes, yellow doesn't have... yellow doesn't really have a significant biological effect. Not something that you remotely need to be concerned about.
So how have we, is there? We must have adjusted to it in some way. So what function?
Well, really, green is the neutral. Green really doesn't do anything. Although, again, blue and green in the spectrum are close together. So if you shine a blue light, if the sun goes down, right, and you've got no electricity, sun goes down, your body senses that the blue light's disappeared. It triggers your melanoxin receptor to switch off, which allows melatonin to be released. And so you begin to feel sleepy and you go into your sleep cycle. You don't fall asleep instantly, but within a few hours you'll fall asleep because the melatonin begins to increase. If you then switch on an artificial light which has blue in it, your melatonin will switch off. It just stops being released. And so if you're sitting in front of a screen and you've got blue light shining on your eyes or on your skin, that will stop your melatonin release. And it will interrupt it will delay your sleep cycle. And green can also do that to a degree, because blue and green are quite close. But generally, green light is neutral in terms of its effect on the body. Apart from that one aspect of you can block melatonin release with some green frequencies, ones that are close to blue. But generally, green's neutral. Blue is stimulatory and inflammatory, but is only a tiny proportion of the spectrum. And red and infrared are soothing, and they give a steady, gentle energy, and they counterbalance the disturbance that was caused by the blue, and they're always present together. The danger of the blue frequency is in artificial lights is that it's on its own. It's just blue. And so there's no infrared to balance it. So you're getting damage, constant damage, and constant stimulus.
Yeah.
And it's also flickering, whereas the sunlight doesn't flicker. And it's also, sunlight is unpolarized. And when it hits the cell water in your body, your cell water polarizes one's light. And the act of polarization is another little magical aspect of life, that we capture light and we polarize it. And so by polarizing something, you've slightly changed its form, and so you've captured some of its magic. And so when you get artificial light is always polarized to start with. So you can't experience the magic of polarizing it because it's already polarized.
Well, I'm so glad you've studied this, because I have tried to study it and I find it very, very challenging. I mean, I can understand some fundamental principles like you've been describing, but I'm so glad you've put that so clearly, because, it is a hell of a lot to know, and I'm sure there's more complexity than you've described as well.
But
But
there is. I mean, I don't fully understand it. There are aspects of it that I understand quite well, but you've got other things such as sunlight comes towards you, but it spirals. It doesn't come straight towards you. So there's a spiral movement of the light as well, which
right.
may explain why we have spiral DNA, and who knows.
Oh,
There's all sorts of
fascinating.
nice little things that tie into all this.
So let's
But
move on
what's great
to.
about
Go
just
on.
to move back, what's fantastic about Jack Kruse is that he will go into all these details if you want them. And if you want to speak to him in great detail about it, he's now got a sort of paid part of his site. But if you just want the basics, he will go, here's what you do. You get up at dawn, take your shoes off, you take your clothes off as much as possible. You go outside and you stare at the sun at sunrise. You come in, you eat some food, then you go about your day and you get as much sunlight as you can on your break here and there. You touch the tree. If you can't be barefoot, you lean against the tree. You drink decent water, decent food that you've sourced locally. And then when the sun goes, then in the evening, you try and watch the sunset. It's less important, but it's still good. And then when the sun goes down, you block all forms of blue, either by using wire or candles or blue blocking glasses. And then you
What
get
I'm
yourself.
wearing here.
Yeah, I've got some somewhere.
Yeah, yeah.
And then you get yourself to bed in a cold, dark room, and you repeat. And so he will tell you the basics for free.
Yeah.
And really, that's all you need to know. If you
Yeah.
want to know how it works, you buy his book or you read his blogs.
But the thing is, you can experiment with his advice and see how you feel. That's the great thing. You know, you don't have to be. This is not medical advice. This isn't any. You know, it's not dangerous advice. It's just do things differently, live slightly differently, and notice how you feel.
You basically, I try and phrase it as try to live. Okay, you're going about your job in the modern world, but within that, try to live as much as possible how you would have lived 5,000 years ago, wherever you're living. And so in the winter, try to get a bit cold. If you're living in Northern Europe and it's winter, don't crank the central heating up. You know, try to experience a bit of cold because it's another signal to your body.
Yeah, absolutely.
About you're actually, by getting cold, your body, first of all, your body can survive it. It may be a little bit uncomfortable when you first become reaccustomed to experiencing cold, but once you get the hang of it, your body generates its own heat, and then you feel fine, and then you can go out in a t-shirt in winter.
Yeah.
But it's all about giving your body more data to work with. If the quality of the input to your body is more accurate, you will get a more coherent signal interpretation. Yeah. So it's the more clues you can give your body about the time of year and where you're living at any given moment, your body will respond. And it's like fine-tuning an engine. If you want the engine to run smoothly, you need an expert mechanic to adjust all the moving parts. But you don't have to think of that. We don't have to worry about, do I need to take more vitamin C? Should I eat more protein? Don't need to worry about that. If you give your body the correct inputs, where you are on the planet and what time of year it is, your body will naturally do the rest for you. It's an autopilot, tremendous system.
Yeah. It's I mean, you know, you're talking about light, and I've heard Jack Kruse say that one of his moments of revelation, if you like, was when he realised he was grossly overweight, and he started taking the morning sun, and he started just looking at the sun first thing in the morning and eating more locally, and he's lost a massive. I mean, he's still a big guy, isn't he? You know, it's not a little will o' the wisp type thing, but
no, he's not skinny. Yeah, I mean, he was
he's not
skinny. He
but
was
he's
absolutely huge.
He says he was huge.
He was. I don't know. I can't remember how big he was, but he was properly big, like per fat.
Yeah, he was big. So he lost a huge amount of weight. He says he didn't do it by dieting. He said he did it by putting himself more in rhythm with the biorhythms, you know, with the, what are they called?
Yep.
The circadian rhythms.
Yeah, well, initially he took medical advice because he broke his knee meniscus and needed an operation, and he went to one of his doctor colleagues and said, "Could you fix my knee? I seem to have knackered it." And in not so many words, his colleague said, "You're too fat to operate on," basically. Put it through. And he said, "Okay, yeah, fair enough. You're right. I need to lose some weight, so I'll go off and lose some weight. Come back and see you." So he'd never tried to lose weight in his life, so he was like, "Well, I'll go to the library in the medical school and look up what the medical system advises on weight loss." And so he took the best medical advice, which was, do more, eat less. And he got worse, he got bigger. So then he was incredibly frustrated at how can the medical system that he supports and works for and believes in, how can it fail so badly with something such as obesity? So he spent a couple of years delving into energy use in the body and how it all works. And this is where he went back to like Russian literature from 100 years ago and stuff. And he began to realize that the body's not a closed system, it's an open system. And so it's not calories in, calories out. It's not high activity, low activity. That's kind of irrelevant. And it's all about maintaining light. You take in light and information from the world. And if you can maintain or hold or control as much of that light and information as possible, the body will recognize that it's fully, what's the word? It has
sated.
Nutrition, satiated.
It's got everything it needs, yeah.
Yes, and so you will then trim down to whatever your ideal bodily weight is. If you're in that ideal situation. If you're losing energy, losing light, you're losing control of your light, you're releasing it because your body's not working as well as it should, then your body will fight to keep hold of energy. So it will constantly increase the amount of fat and it won't allow fat to be burnt because your body's sensing that it's losing energy. Even though it's losing the energy to the environment, you're not doing anything, you're sitting there like a fat, but because you haven't controlled the light that you've captured, it's being released and your body senses this release as a loss. And so it then prevents any other loss of energy by holding on to the fat stores. So he realized that what you've got to do is to get the mitochondria working better. And the way you do that is you go back to a basic reset of respecting the sunrise and the sunset. That's the most fundamental.
It's so simple, isn't it? It's so simple.
Yeah. And then he said he ate more. He also ate a lot of seafood, specifically oysters. He ate a lot of fat. His calorific intake probably went up. It was probably significantly higher than most people would be on when they were losing weight. Because what he was trying to do was he was using fat rather than carbohydrates, because fat contains more electrons than carbohydrates. Carbohydrates have higher powered electrons because they're made in the summer sun, which has high powered light, whereas fats are made all year round. So fats, when they burn or when they metabolize, they release a steady red light, whereas carbohydrates release a flash of blue light.
Wow.
And so the flash of blue light is harder for the mitochondria to deal with because it's like a sudden poof, whereas the red light's like a flow. Wow. And so he reverted to using steady fat-driven energy rather than the high-powered carbohydrate-driven energy. Wow. Because he recognized that his mitochondria weren't in a good state. And so if you're ill, generally speaking, most people who are a bit unwell in the world, they feel the benefits if they remove the carbohydrates and they begin to use fat. Some people are so ill that they can't use fats and they have to use carbohydrates. So there's a contextual thing here. You can't just say, if you're ill, give up carbs and you feel better. That there are nuances.
It's funny, these glasses I bought, well, these are clip-ons, these things. So they just clip onto my glasses, this thing. And I've got another pair as well, but these are winter spectrum glasses. So these don't get rid of as much blue light as the summer ones. So the summer glasses take out more blue light. The reason is because in the winter there's apparently less blue light around outside, you know.
Mhm.
Not that I use them
And
outside.
you do need some blue light.
Yeah, and so this doesn't filter out everything. So because you're, you know, so that it's kind of keeping those. You've got some blue light coming in, but you're not overloaded with it from screens.
Yeah. And so they reduce it. They reduce the stress. See, the blue light, the unopposed blue light that comes from the screens, is damaging to your retina. And
Right.
what it actually does, your retina has a lot of fish oil, DHA fish oil, which is why fish is good for life. Why your grand tell you that you'll see better with eating fish. And so your retina's got, I think your retina has the highest concentration of fish oil of any tissue in your body, because it's one of the most active is having to translate light into an electrical signal. And so when blue light that's unopposed by red, artificial blue light, when that hits your retina, it oxidizes the fish oil. So it breaks down into 2 or 3 components which are anti-inflammatory. So you don't get any pain or any obvious damage, but you need to replace the fish oil. So if you're not eating fish, your body then goes to the tissue which is closest, which is your brain. So if you live in the modern world, and let's say you want to be strict vegan and you don't want to eat any fish, and you use a lot of screen-based devices, you will constantly oxidize the DHA oil in your retina, and your body will replace it by going to the brain and stealing from the brain. So you can now see why mental health issues are a massive problem in modern society, because we're screen-based. To a large degree, we avoid fish, and to a growing degree, disturbingly, we completely avoid fish with the vegetal, plant-based diet propaganda which is being pushed on everyone. So your granny was right. You need to eat fish at least once a week. But if you're using lots of screens, you need to eat fish more.
Because one of the things I've noticed, and I've said this in another video recently, is that, you know, working as a psychotherapist for the last 20 odd years, I've had a lot of experience of, you know, what kinds of people come in over those years. And I'd say in the last 6 or 7 years, I've seen increasing numbers of young children, really, up to the age of maybe 20, 18, 19, 20, but from the age of about 8 or 9, with chronic anxiety issues, really bad anxiety issues. And, you know, I do say to them sometimes, I usually have a parent with them when I'm speaking to them, but I say to the parent and the child, you know, your blue light is really not doing you any good. Your blue light, because the first thing you look at in the morning is blue light, full on blue light, unfiltered blue light. And this is just telling everything just to switch off, you know, like just to, or switch on, or it's causing a lot of stress to the mind. And there was one client I had very recently who I said to her, you need to turn your internet off at night. You need to get your body to rest, because even though you're getting these frequencies from your internet, and if it's not going off at night, although you might still be sensing other frequencies, the one closest to you is still pumping energy through your body, and it's saying to your body, it's still time to be awake. You should be awake still, you know, because there's frequencies going on.
Yep.
I said to her, try and switch it off. Well, she looked at me very suspiciously. She's only a young woman, 20 maybe. She looked at me very suspiciously to say, well, you old people don't understand, you know, you old people don't understand the new technology, the new technology, etc. You know. Yeah. Well, anyway, it so happened she moved into a new place, and for a week she had no internet. And when she came to see me, she said, I've never slept so well in my life. She said, I remembered what you'd said, and I couldn't work out why. I thought I must just be tired. But she said, I'm sleeping really, really well. And now we're turning the internet off at night. So I don't know, you know, what's your perspective on that, on internet?
It's absolutely right. Again, if you go back to how would we have lived thousands of years ago, let's sort of say we used to be cavemen. So at night we would crawl into a cave and we'd sleep on some animal skins. So we'd be connected to the earth, yeah, because animal skins conduct electricity. So we'd still be earthed. It would be absolutely dark, absolutely silent, and there would be the only energy that comes to Earth comes from the sun, from the universe, like primarily from the sun. So if the sun's absent, we're getting no energy input at all. So you'd have absolute stillness, apart from the magnetic field of the Earth, which is a constant.
The 7.83 Schumann resonance.
Well, yeah, that's the Schumann resonance, which is the interaction of the Earth's magnetic field with the ionosphere to create a sort of scalar resonance wave.
Yeah.
But the magnetic field which comes up through the Earth, the flux of the magnetic field, which is waning, it seems that we do better when we're better able to make repairs when the magnetic field is stronger. So when the sun goes down, the magnetic field in the dark side of the Earth, the magnetism at night is stronger. And so we have no chaotic energy from the sun coming in. We've got this very stable field coming perpendicular on the Earth. And when you have REM sleep, the only thing that moves is your eyes. The rest of your body's paralyzed. Mm-hmm. And so it's thought that to create the correct environment in your brain or in your body for cellular repair to take place, you need to be absolutely motionless. You have whatever repair is taking place, and you have a constant of the magnetic field coming from the Earth, and you're motionless, because when you're in REM sleep, your body is actually paralyzed. You can't move your arms or legs, and that's by design. And so we're supposed to have, if we have a system in our body that paralyzes us at night, that sort of implies that your body wants to be absolutely still for a critical reason. And so if your Wi-Fi router is switched on in the other room, you've been watching Netflix, and you go to sleep, and maybe you fall asleep because you're tired, but every single cell in your body, which is surrounded by water, all surrounded by water, all those water molecules are being vibrated at 2.5 billion times a second by your Wi-Fi router. And so you don't have to be a genius to realize that if your body's designed for stillness, and what you've got is every single molecule's vibrating 2.5 billion times a second, that's not stillness. So, yeah, that's definitely not still. No. You might not be able to see it or feel it, but it's definitely not calm.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that was a big issue. The other one is the other one that some people are affected by is just the electricity in the walls, in the wiring in the walls in the bedroom. So if people are struggling to sleep, another thing you can try is to go to the fuse box and figure out which fuse covers your bedroom and which fuse covers the lighting of the room below your bedroom, the ceiling lighting, and switch those two off at night, and then you'll find that you're in you're no longer vibrating at 60 hertz during the night, which you would have been previously. No, sleep hygiene is very important in terms of removing electrical equipment from your room, switching your phone off, switching your router, your Wi-Fi router off. That's very important. If you have lots of neighbours or you live in a high-rise apartment, you're screwed. If you're a student and you live on campus, you're screwed. So they are quite important things. But the single most important thing in terms of anxiety and sleep issues is lack of sunshine, especially morning sunshine.
When you consider
the Wi-Fi router does have an impact, but the single biggest driver in modern society in the morning.
So when you consider most teenagers, for example, are glued to their phones, it's like going into a bat cave when you when you go into their rooms, the curtains are drawn, the place is dark, and they're looking at blue light until maybe.
And they might be playing. They might be playing Fortnite till 4 o'clock in the morning or something.
Yeah.
And then they get up at 10, or if they're not at school, they get up at 10 or 11 o'clock.
Yeah.
So they miss the key.
Yeah.
The key point with sunlight is you get the ultraviolet frequencies, which are more powerful, which arrive around sort of lunchtime. But the sun at sunrise contains no ultraviolet. It only contains red, blue, green, and infrared.
Right.
And it's those frequencies which are the base frequencies that your body is designed to operate on. And you need to receive those frequencies in the morning to give your body the correct trigger, so that it's then prepared to receive the more powerful ultraviolet, which arrives later on. Ultraviolet's more powerful, contains more energy and information, can be more powerful in the body. But only if you've prepared your eyes and skin by exposing them to the lower energy light.
It's amazing. I mean, it's so simple. I mean, it's some stuff, you know, we grew up like this, didn't we? We grew up without blue light. We got out of bed in the morning and we went straight to school, we walked through the morning sunshine. We probably did the same at the weekend, especially when we were quite young. We didn't look at blue screens all day.
Then when it went, and you played out after school, you played out, and when it went dark, you went home.
Yeah.
Basically, you went home, went to bed.
That's it.
There was no children's TV in the evenings. You just came in at 9 o'clock. It's gone dark. Went to bed.
Yeah. So let me just. There's a couple more questions I want to ask, and I'd like to close because we've gone over the hour. One is something about meat, because I know you've turned into a raving carnivore, and I'd just like to understand what that's about. And also the series that I'm working on at the moment is trying to awaken people to the dangers of 5G, and I'm just wondering before we go on to the meat situation, because we're talking about frequencies right now, what is your view or understanding on how dangerous 5G might be for us, just from a health perspective, let alone the surveillance and all the other aspects?
When I mentioned that your Wi-Fi router will vibrate your water molecules at 2.5 billion times a second, if we move to 5G, you'll have transmitter antennas very, very close to your house, possibly in the street lights, but certainly within 50 meters of your house. And they operate on frequencies from anywhere from 10 gigabytes to 80 gigabytes. Gigahertz, sorry. So you're talking about 10 billion times a second or 80 billion times a second in terms of vibrations. So that's another obvious disturbance. But what's very worrying about the incredibly worrying thing about 5G is that the antennas need to be much closer to your home. Previously, you'd have an antenna on the hill a couple of miles away, and you get a sufficient mobile phone signal with the 3 and 4Gs. But with the 5Gs, because of the frequency, I think it's something like 98% of the signal is absorbed by atmospheric factors such as water, oxygen, carbon dioxide, and ozone. And so given such a vast amount of the signal is absorbed by the atmosphere, they have to increase the power of the signal in order for it to travel even that short distance. But as long as enough of the signal gets through, they can transmit vast amounts of data. So it's interesting from a technological point of view, but from a health point of view, you've got a very, very powerful transmitter quite close to you. And your body contains water, and it utilizes oxygen and releases carbon dioxide, and all those things absorb directly the energy of the signal. And what's very worrying is that some of the frequencies, not all of them, some of the frequencies, I think it's 60 gigahertz, is the precise resonant frequency of an oxygen molecule. So if you happen to be involved or be close to a 5G system which uses around those frequencies.
60 did you say 60 gigahertz?
Yeah, 60. That is the frequency that causes oxygen to resonate. And if you resonate oxygen, it interferes with its ability to bond with hemoglobin in your blood. So
And we've
you
seen
will
the
be able,
studies. There are studies on this. I've seen them online. Yeah.
and so you are interfering with your body's ability to absorb oxygen from the atmosphere. I mean, you shouldn't really need any more explanation than that. That in itself should be a reason to immediately have a moratorium on the technology. But bigger issues at play. So it's exceptionally dangerous. It causes mitochondrial dysfunction. It opens the blood-brain barrier. It causes leakiness in your mitochondria. If you're getting up to these 60 gigahertz, you're causing problems with your hemoglobin, your oxygen carrying capacity, your mitochondrial function. So the amount of oxygen builds up in certain areas of the body and is too low in other areas. You then get free radical reactive oxygen species created because you've got a loss of control over oxygen management. No, it's extremely bad. And if you happen to be in a specific place where specific frequencies are being used, it could cause people to just drop dead. It's that serious. It's no longer it might take a few years until you notice the effect is a gradual chronic situation. In some cases, it could be acute. In that if it's tuned to the right frequency, people could drop dead. It's essentially a weaponized.
Okay. Well, that's coincidental then that we're in the middle of a coronavirus outbreak. So let's not go there, because I want to steer clear of coronavirus. There's so much wall-to-wall propaganda about it at the minute. It's kind of like everywhere you go, everyone's talking about it, and I just think, talk about mind control. Talk about,
I mean, whenever you get that situation where everyone's talking about it, you can absolutely guarantee that it's fake. Absolutely categorically guarantee that it's fake. It's just, it may seem hard to believe, but lots of people die from flu and pneumonia at this time of year throughout the world, and we don't normally highlight those deaths unless it's an election year in America, in which case we do, and we create a scare. And so just ignore it.
It's so transparent, isn't it? But anyway, let me just digress, because I know we need to close very soon, and go on to meat, because let me just briefly say my journey in all my life. Sometimes I've been vegetarian and then I've gone back to meat, then I've gone vegetarian, then back to meat. I've never been vegan. Sometimes I find myself getting through a day or two without any dairy, without any fish, without any meat. But that's not because I'm trying to, it's just because that's what I'm growing, that's what's available, and I'm not really fussed, that there's no meat or no fish there. So what's happened in the last probably 10 or 12 years since I've been growing my own food, I've slowly eaten less and less meat, only because it seems an absolute criminal waste of money to buy meat when I've got so much food, so much abundance of food. So I've become quite innovative with vegetables and plant-based food, etc., etc. Now, that doesn't mean I'm a vegetarian. I would never hang myself on a label because I don't believe in it. But I do eat chicken now and again, and I do eat fish probably most weeks. And I do eat butter, and I do eat cheese. But my principles is eat local, eat what grows. And I've been doing that for the last 10 or 12 years. And the other thing I've noticed is, and I don't know what this is a result of, whether it's because I'm not eating meat or because I'm more in tune with my environment, that my whole system is calmer. Even though I can get quite excited about, this nonsense that's going on around the world, I feel kinder. I feel more compassionate. I feel more tuned in. Now, according to your philosophy, where you're coming from, it may well just be because I'm localizing. I'm more in tune with my environment. Or it could be that I'm not eating meat, because a lot of people say when you eat meat, you eat the suffering of the animals as well.
Or it could be that you spend more time down the allotment and you're actually touching the earth and you're out in the sun.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. But the whole point is that I'm localized. I'm in my local area. I'm in rhythm with nature. Of course, I'm out in the sun. I'm out all weathers as well. I go out in the cold, in the middle of winter, in the rain.
And you're eating, by definition, you're eating seasonally.
Yeah. I try to eat as seasonally as possible. There are some things in the winter that I do buy, but I try and really limit how much I buy that isn't seasonal. And I absolutely limit what I buy that comes from overseas. I try and limit anything that's been shipped in from Spain or Israel or, you know, wherever
Hmm.
it grew, I absolutely limit eating that. Because for me, that's not local food. It's not designed for my mitochondria. It doesn't work for me right here, right now. So tell me about you with your raving carnivore head on, because you've kind of, you know, you've got this Facebook group, haven't you? 100% and beyond.
Yeah, I mean, I need to sort of backtrack a little bit here, because one of the when I was following Jack Kruse, I used to follow his forum quite actively, and people used to write in, and they'd be in terrible state, and they'd be sort of, I'm ill with this, and this has happened, I've got this problem, and he would ask them to write a quick synopsis of their problem, like a journal, if you like, and he would help them. And so I used to just lurk and read it, because I wanted to learn how he treated people and what advice he gave them. And most of them were sort of relatively old, rather unwell, middle-aged American, slightly whiny women. And then every now and again, someone interesting would crop up. And this ex-hippie from Skelmersdale, which is just down the road from me, he appeared, and he was very eloquent, wrote in an entertaining manner. He was funny, but he had a problem, because he'd been veggie and vegan for years, and he'd suddenly become crippled with arthritis. And so he said, look, I'm a hopeless hippie. I don't understand any science, so just tell me, what the fuck do I have to do, and I'll go and do it. And so I kind of followed with interest his story. And he basically fixed himself. He reversed he had psoriatic arthritis. And so he got considerably better following the advice of Jack Kruse, sort of 70, 80% better. He was able to walk again and kind of do some things, maybe get back playing the drums. And then he took it a step further, and he was vegetarian, and then he started eating like Jack Kruse recommends, kind of everything, no grains, no grains of any sort, limit processed food, plenty of fish, plenty of fat, plenty of meat, and seasonal vegetables. And so he then got to the point where he said, well, I'm just eating sort of steak and broccoli. And he said, so I'm just going to not eat the broccoli, because he looked into the anti-nutrients that are present in all plants, and things like oxalates and lectins, which are involved in arthritis. Well, many people have linked them to arthritis. So he got rid of all the vegetables, and he just ate meat and fat, some fish, and he avoided dairy as well. And he fully recovered from his arthritis. And so he then wrote a book about it. It's called like Arthritis, the Best Thing That Ever Happened to Me. And he started a group on Facebook to share his experience, because he's like, if you go to the doctor, they just tell you that you've got arthritis, you need painkillers for the rest of your life. That's it. They don't give you any option. They don't suggest anything at all. It's just painkillers, off you go. So, which is very frustrating. So he wanted, as a sort of service to society, like, look, I've done it, you can do it as well. It might work for you. If it doesn't, who cares? It's worth trying. So he started this Facebook group, and he asked me to join, because he said, I don't know anything about the science, and I'm sure people will join and they'll start asking me questions about the science, and I don't know them. Would you mind joining as an admin, just in case we get that kind of question? So I think he started it with like 4 or 5 people and about 20 friends. And there's now, I think, there's about 12,000 people on it.
Wow.
And some amazing sort of stories of health reversals, all sorts of things. So, yeah, obviously weight loss is a huge one.
Is this the
Diabetes.
100% and beyond website? Yeah. Okay.
It's 100% carnivore and beyond. And so when he asked me to join that, I'd been kind of low carb, no bread, that kind of thing for a few years. And he asked me to join, and I thought, well, if I'm going to join the group, I should probably give it a try. So it was the middle of winter, and I thought, well, sorry, I won't eat any vegetables or potatoes. Potatoes for me, I like my potatoes, so potatoes was the big thing, getting rid of them. So I just switched to eating just meat, fish. Do a little bit of dairy, doesn't bother me. Um, and I thought it was fantastic. I didn't notice any enormous improvements, but my energy levels were very, very good, and my little niggling aches and pains that you might get in, like if I go and play tennis, you might get sort of slightly sore knee or sore hip or something, because you're in your 50s. That just doesn't happen. I don't get stiff joints at all. And so for me, it was just worth doing just for that. My digestion's good. I drink too much beer. So I'm on a modified version of the diet. Mine's the steak and ale diet, I think.
Right.
Accurate
Sounds very good.
But I can get away with drinking beer. I know that I couldn't get away with drinking the beer that I drink if I was also eating potatoes and vegetables.
Yeah, right.
So it's kind of a nice balance. But what was really good about his little group was, as a result of the group, I got to know him. He's not very far away, so I went down to meet him. And then we met an osteopath guy who was also approximately our age. He's been practicing as an osteopath / healer, naturopath, whatever you want to call it, kind of someone who doesn't want to use drugs to cure people, and he wants to take into consideration, the word holistic doesn't do it justice. It's taking every aspect in terms of, he believes that if you get stiffness in certain muscles or certain joints, it can be emotional trauma that you've held onto or captured or frozen in certain parts of your body, and you're trying to keep it under wraps to protect your own psyche. Right? And so he works with the
trauma
release of that, and he works with all sorts of different people all over the world. He's been doing this for 30 years, and he's the most amazing guy. And he has also been working for 30 years against the pharmaceutical industry. They are not the enemy, but he ends up fixing people who've been damaged or rejected. He gets a lot of late stage cancer patients, for example, where the pharmaceutical industry has given up on them. And he can't save all of them, and he would never claim to be able to save them, but he has helped some of them recover, including his present wife, who was terminally ill when they met. And so he's a brilliant guy. And so we got together and decided that we should do something. And then yet another person who was also on the group was a chap called Ben Hunt, who is kind of, he used to work in marketing, but he now lives at home. He has sort of ducks and chickens, and wants to be as self-sufficient as possible. He's very passionate about soil and soil quality throughout the world, and how we need to address that. He's not a sort of mad campaigning hippie. He's a sensible, well-read guy who's also a brilliant writer. And so the four of us have got together. So Jeremy's the healer who's been doing it for 30 years professionally. Phil is the hippie who got desperately ill and then fixed himself by doing various modalities of healing. I'm the sort of slightly nerdy guy that's read all the more recent science about light and energy. And Ben's the guy who pulls it all together. So we formed this little outfit, which we've named The Human Unleashed.
Nice one. Got a website?
Yeah, thehumanunleashed.com, where it's like a learning center. There's lots of free stuff on there, but ultimately the aim is for it to be a subscription that people can afford, because we have to buy food and have a roof over our head.
Of course.
So,
and you've got some kind of retreat course or something going on soon, where you've got a couple of places left, haven't you?
We've got a retreat coming up in Spain in May, where there are 1 or 2 rooms left. There's plenty of day tickets left. 3 days, lots of different speakers, including Dr. Sean Baker, who's big guru in the carnivore community in America. He's coming over, one of his few European appearances. And We've got a guy called Bobby Risto, who's another, I think he's an ex-vegan, ex-veggie who became a carnivore and has had some amazing experience with vast quantities of psychedelics to enable healing. We've also got contacts with, this time we're not going to have a shaman there, but we're hoping to have sort of shaman there in the future. There's all sorts of different speakers. We've got sort of people who address the spiritual side of things, the emotional side of things.
Lovely.
It's 3 or 4 days in May in the south of Spain, near Gibraltar. Lovely place.
Lovely. So
if you go to thehumanunleashed.com, the details are on there about the conferences.
Okay, all right. Well,
and we've got another one coming. We're planning another one. This one in Spain is a carnivore. We did it last year for the first time, and it was lovely. It was fantastic. Not just the speakers, but the atmosphere of everyone stays there for 3 or 4 days. You mingle with the speakers constantly. It's not just the talk. When the talk's finished, you're walking around in the grounds of this old monastery, and you're rubbing shoulders. You can sit down with one of the speakers and spend half an hour talking to him on your own.
Lovely. Well, if you need a mind body specialist, I'm here.
Oh, very good. No, we may well because we've got a couple of issues with the coronavirus story. So we have a couple of people coming from America, and it's not absolutely certain they're going to
make it. Yeah.
And we're hoping to do another one. This one's carnivore because it was carnivore last year, and it's carnivore this year. But we're going to slightly adjust the model because carnivore can be a bit off-putting for some people. But what it is, it's a collection of people who have managed to reverse their autoimmune disease. Basically.
Excellent.
And so we're going to reposition it as more of an autoimmune conference, and carnivore is one of the possible tools. Fasting is another possible tool.
Yeah.
But there are various approaches you can take, and carnivore is just one of them. So we don't think that perhaps calling it carnivore is pigeonholing it a little too much. It's really all about how do you heal from an autoimmune condition.
Yeah. Excellent. Fantastic. Well, Graeme, it's been a real pleasure to sort of what's the word? Get all the information off you. What's it when you sort of take the information from someone's brains? God, I've got too many languages in my head. Anyway, to
pick your brains.
Pick your brains. That's the one. Pick your brains. Excellent. So what I'll do is some of the references we've talked about, I'll put as links underneath this video, and then if anyone wants to know more about you, they can go to thehumanunleashed.com, and we've got Jack Kruse as a reference as well. So there's lots of stuff that's come up that we'll link below. And hopefully that will drive people to you and to the whole issue of staying well in this crazy world at the moment.
Yeah, it's a challenge, but like you said at the beginning of the discussion, you have to be able to put aside what you've previously learned and unlearn to relearn. Really,
that's right. Well, okay. Well, thank you very much for your time. It's been a long time, so it's been a real pleasure. So I'll see you soon.
Thanks a lot. See you, Jenny.
Cheers.